So I'm Rebecca Byrnes, and I'm the Deputy Director of the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty initiative. The world has known for years that we need to stop burning fossil fuels, but fossil fuel production remains unconstrained. So the call for the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty is really building on decades of powerful grassroots and national efforts to push back on fossil fuel expansion by calling for a global response to ending fossil fuels. And this came about because we know that to stay within the safe temperature limit of 1.5 degrees, we need to wind down fossil fuels. And actually the latest production gap report tells us we need to phase out fossil fuels by 6% every year between now and 2030. But we also know that this transition has to be fair and equitable, and we can't be leaving countries or communities behind. And while we have the UNFCCC and the Paris Agreement, which are vitally important parts of the solution to climate change, they only address one side of the equation. And most countries, while they've pledged to reduce their emissions, this hasn't filtered through to constraining fossil fuels. So the idea is that the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty would help to ensure that countries reduce their fossil fuel production in line with the 1.5 degree temperature goal. And that this is done equitably in line with the needs of vulnerable countries and communities, and particularly those that are dependent on fossil fuels right now for their development. And the call for a fossil fuel treaty has been around for a while. Pacific Islands first called for a global agreement on coal back in 2015. In 2017, the Lofoten Declaration called for an end to fossil fuel expansion and a global managed decline. And global movements on fossil fuel expansion have been growing. The non-proliferation framing that we've been using comes from an article that was published by Peter Newell and Andrew Sims from the University of Sussex. And in that paper, they adapted the 3 principles of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which actually map really well onto fossil fuels. And in particular, these are non-proliferation, or stopping expansion of fossil fuels, disarmament, or in the case of fossil fuels, this is about phasing out existing production, and peaceful use of nuclear energy, or in the case of fossil fuels, a peaceful transition towards a fossil-free economy and energy system. Yes, that's a great framing of it. So yeah, at its core, it's really about stopping emissions at the source by looking at the production side of the equation. So it's about phasing out the supply of fossil fuels rather than looking at the consumption end.